The broken rocket, the morning air was cold and quiet on the edge of the desert. Sundar Pichai stood at the gate of the research center, staring at the massive rocket sitting on its launch pad. It looked proud and lonely against the pale sky, its silver body catching the faint light of dawn. Nobody else was around yet. Sundar tightened his scarf and walked slowly toward the gatekeeper's booth. The gatekeeper, an old man with gray stubble on his chin, squinted at him. "You sure you're in the right place, son?" he asked, looking Sundar up and down. Sundar's shoes were dusty, and his jacket had a little tear near the elbow. He didn't look like someone who belonged here, at the country's most advanced aerospace testing facility. "Yes," Sundar said softly. "I was asked to come," the gatekeeper chuckled. You look like a school teacher." Sundar smiled faintly. "I've been called worse." The man shook his head, but let him through. Sundar walked along the paved path toward the hangar. He passed engineers in bright vests and hard hats who hardly noticed him. He passed young assistants carrying stacks of documents, eyes on their phones. And he passed one-man engineer in a crisp white shirt and shiny black shoes, who stopped in his tracks and laughed out loud. "Hey," the engineer called. "You lost?" Sundar turned. "No," he said. "I came to see the rocket." The engineer's grin widened. "You came to see the rocket?" "My friend, that rocket is broken. No one here can fix it." "And you—" He gestured at Sundar's simple clothes and quiet face. "You think you can?" Sundar didn't answer. He simply looked at the rocket, a deep sadness in his eyes. The engineer laughed again and walked away, shaking his head, but Sundar kept walking until he reached the base of the rocket. The noise of the morning picked up. Tools clanged. People argued. Someone dropped a wrench. And the engineer who had laughed earlier gathered a group of technicians and started pointing at a diagram. "Listen up," he barked. "The guidance system failed again. We've tried everything. The launch is canceled until further notice. Nobody, and I mean nobody, touches this thing until the director says otherwise." Sundar stood quietly behind them, listening. The engineer noticed him again and frowned. "Didn't I tell you to get lost?" He snapped. Sundar looked at him calmly. "Can I see the schematics?" "Yes." The group of technicians exchanged glances, and then the engineer let out a sharp laugh. "What did you say?" "The schematics?" Sundar repeated. "For the guidance system?" The engineer's laughter echoed through the hangar. Even a few of the technicians snickered. "Oh, you're serious," the engineer said, finally. "Sure, why not? Maybe you'll fix it with magic." He shoved a thick folder at Sundar and walked away. Sundar sat down on a wooden crate, opened the folder, and began reading. The hours passed slowly. Outside, the sun rose high and baked the desert in gold and heat. Inside, Sundar stayed still, flipping page after page, his brow furrowed, his finger tracing the lines of the circuit diagrams and data tables. He didn't eat. He didn't drink. He just studied dot at one point. A technician came over and said kindly, "Sir, you don't have to waste your time. That rocket's dead." Sundar just nodded and kept reading dot. By late afternoon, the engineer returned. His shirt was wrinkled now, his face shiny with sweat. He was carrying a coffee and wearing a smug smile. "Still at it?" he said. "Yes," Sundar said. The engineer leaned over and tapped the diagram Sundar was studying. "It's useless? Trust me, we've been over it 100 times." "You missed something," Sundar murmured. The engineer's eyes narrowed. "What?" "Here," Sundar said, pointing at a tiny detail in the wiring. "This circuit, it's inverted. It's sending the wrong signal. If you swap these two connections and recalibrate the sensor array, it should work." There was silence. Then the engineer laughed again, but it sounded forced this time. "Oh, really? That's your grand idea? Swap a wire?" Sundar looked at him and said nothing. The engineer waved at a technician. "Fine," he said. "Humor him. Swap the wires." The technician hesitated, but obeyed. Everyone gathered around as the technician made the change. Then they watched as Sundar quietly climbed up the metal ladder to the control panel at the side of the rocket. He pressed a button. Lights that had been dead all day flickered to life. The guidance system screen lit up green. The engineer's face fell. The technician gasped. It's working. Sundar climbed back down and handed the folder to the engineer. You're welcome, he said softly. He started to walk away, but the engineer called after him. Wait, how did you know? Who are you? Sundar paused and looked back. For the first time, there was a hint of a smile on his lips. Just someone who used to dream about rockets. He said and then he walked out of the hangar, leaving everyone staring after him, but the story was far from over that night as Sundar sat alone at a small cafe near the train station. Sipping a cup of tea, a stranger approached his table. Mr. Pichai? The man asked in a low voice. Sundar looked up. Yes? The man slid into the seat across from him and leaned in. You shouldn't have fixed that rocket, he whispered. Sundar froze. What do you mean? The man glanced around nervously. You don't know what you've stepped into. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the cafe windows. And somewhere far off in the dark, a siren wailed, *, the secret mission. The man who sat across from Sundar at the cafe was not like anyone Sundar had met before. His eyes darted left and right as though even the shadows on the walls might overhear him. He wore a plain brown jacket, but Sundar noticed the faint bulge of something heavy in the inner pocket, and the faintest glint of a badge clipped to his belt that he quickly covered with his hand. He leaned closer, his breath quick, his voice sharp but quiet. You shouldn't have fixed that rocket, he said again, this time with more urgency. Sundar met his gaze without flinching. Why not? He asked, his voice even and calm, though inside, a faint unease began to stir in his chest. The man licked his lips and glanced at the doorway of the cafe, where two people in dark suits had just stepped in and stood near the counter as if they were ordinary customers. He lowered his voice to nearly a whisper. Because that rocket wasn't supposed to fly again. You weren't supposed to even touch it, and now they know you can. Sundar's fingers tightened slightly around his cup. The tea had gone cold, but he hadn't noticed. Outside the window, the streets were nearly empty, only the dry wind sweeping sand across the stones. The cafe itself had grown quiet too, as though everyone else sensed the strange energy around the table. Sundar looked at the man more closely now. His face was tired, with heavy lines etched into his forehead, and his hands shook slightly. As he tapped a folded piece of paper on the table between them, You have to leave, the man said. Tonight? Now, even? If they catch you here after what you did, they will make sure you never leave. For a long moment, Sundar said nothing. He simply studied the man's face and then the paper, which remained untouched between them. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. Who are you? The man hesitated. Then he gave a faint, sad smile. Nobody. Just someone who doesn't like watching good people disappear. Sundar reached for the paper and unfolded it. It was a map, rough and hand-drawn, showing a stretch of desert, the testing facility, and then something else far beyond it. Deep in the sands, a circle marked with an X. Beneath the circle, scrawled in hurried writing, were the words, Find. The truth before they find you. Before Sundar could ask what it meant, the man stood up abruptly. I can't stay, he said. Just follow the map, and don't trust anyone. He slipped away between the tables and vanished through the back door. The two people in dark suits at the counter turned just as Sundar refolded the map and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Their eyes locked on him for a moment too long before they looked away and ordered coffee. But Sundar could feel it now. Something had shifted in the room. Something unseen had awakened, and he was at the center of it. He rose from his seat, paid the bill quietly, and walked outside into the cool night air. The sky above was wide and dark, scattered with stars, but there was no comfort in them tonight. Somewhere beyond the quiet town, the desert stretched endlessly, hiding whatever truth the man had spoken of. Sundar tightened his scarf and began walking toward the station, but his mind was no longer calm. At the station, he bought a ticket for the last train heading east. The platform was nearly empty, only a few tired travelers leaning against their bags. He sat on a bench near the end of the platform and pulled the map from his pocket again, studying it in the dim light. The X on the map was miles away from any road or town. And yet, as he traced the path with his finger, he felt something strange. A faint memory stirring in the back of his mind. He remembered being a boy, sitting on a hill at night, looking up at the same stars. He remembered a promise he made to himself that no matter how big the world seemed, no matter how many people laughed at him, he would find his place in it, but he never thought that place would be here, on the edge of a desert, being watched by strangers carrying a secret map he didn't understand. The train screeched to a halt, and Sundar boarded quietly. He chose a window seat and kept the map tucked deep in his pocket. Outside, as the train rumbled into motion, he caught sight of two shadows slipping through the station gate, moving fast, following the tracks. The two people from the cafe. Sundar turned his eyes back to the dark glass and forced his breathing to stay steady. The ride was long and silent. The train clattered over metal bridges, through dry valleys, and into the black desert night. Sundar barely moved, his thoughts tangled between fear and determination. When the train finally stopped at a small, deserted station, he stepped off into the cold wind. There was no one else. Just sand, rocks, and the faint outline of distant hills. He pulled the map from his pocket and unfolded it again. From here, he would have to walk. The X was still many miles away, but there was no road, no signpost, only the map and his own. Quiet resolve as he began to walk into the darkness. The sound of the train faded behind him, swallowed by the vast silence of the desert. His steps crunched softly on the sand. Every few moments he glanced back, half expecting to see the two figures from the cafe. But there was nothing, only the faint wind and the stars above. For hours he walked, his scarf pulled tight around his face, his shoes sinking into the sand. He thought of the rocket, how it had come to life under his hands. He thought of the engineer's face, first laughing, then stunned. He thought of the man in the cafe and the warning, "You weren't supposed to fix it." And he thought of the strange sense he had as the rocket's lights flickered green, that he had just set something bigger in motion. As dawn began to break, painting the sky with pale orange light, he reached a ridge of rocks marked on the map. Beyond them lay a shallow valley, and at the very center, hidden by dunes, stood something he did not expect. It was not a building, not a rocket, not anything he could have imagined. It was a massive circular hatch in the ground, half buried by sand with strange symbols carved along its edge. The metal surface shimmered faintly in the early light, as though alive. Sundar froze at the sight, his breath catching in his throat. This was what the map had led him to. As he stepped closer, the sand beneath his feet shifted, and the air seemed to grow heavier. He knelt and brushed more sand away from the hatch, revealing more of the symbols. They were not any language he knew, but they felt familiar somehow. Then, suddenly, a low hum rose from the hatch. The metal glowed faintly, and a seam split down the middle with a sharp hiss. The ground trembled, and the hatch began to open. Sundar staggered back as a warm light poured out from the opening, spilling across the sand. For a moment, all he could do was stare, but then he heard footsteps. Behind him, he turned just in time to see two dark figures cresting the ridge. The same two who had followed him from the cafe. Now they were running toward him, and in their hands gleamed something metallic. Sundar single quotes as heart pounded as the hatch opened wider. And a voice deep and strange but gentle rose from below. Calling his name, he stood at the edge of the opening, torn between the world he knew and the unknown waiting below. The two figures were closing in fast, shouting now, their words lost to the wind. And then Sundar did something he hadn't planned, something even he couldn't explain. He jumped into the light, and the hatch sealed shut above him, cutting off the desert, the dawn, and the two figures left standing on the sand. And as the light enveloped him, the ground beneath his feet vanished, and he began to fall not into darkness, but into something else entirely. The underground world. At first, Sundar thought he was falling through empty air, but it was nothing like air. The light around him shimmered and shifted, warm but weightless, and it carried a faint sound like whispers at the edge of hearing. His scarf fluttered behind him, His hand reached out instinctively, but there was nothing to grab, nothing solid to stop him. Yet he did not feel afraid. Something deep inside, something he could not name, told him this was where he was meant to go. Then the light began to change. It thickened like fog, swirling around him in colors that did not exist. Above the ground, hues he could not describe moved through him, soft blues that felt like memories of childhood, golden streaks that seemed to hum with hope, and faint threads of silver that felt like grief, but also peace. And slowly, almost gently, his feet found ground. He stood in silence for a moment, unsure if his legs would hold him. Then he opened his eyes fully and saw where he was. He stood at the edge of a vast cavern, its ceiling lost in the shimmering light above, its floor stretching so far ahead it seemed to merge with the horizon. The air was warm, faintly electric, and it smelled faintly of rain, though there was no water in sight. Around him, the walls of the cavern glowed faintly with the same strange symbols he had seen on the hatch above. They pulsed softly, as though breathing, and ahead, rising from the center of the cavern floor, was something breathtaking. Got a great machine, taller than the tallest building Sundar had ever seen, stood silent and still. Its surface a seamless blend of metal and stone, its edges curved in ways that defied what he knew of engineering. It looked ancient and yet impossibly advanced, its form both beautiful and intimidating. The machine seemed to hum even in its stillness, a quiet energy, radiating from it like heat from the sun. Sundar took a cautious step forward, then another. His shoes scraped softly on the smooth ground, but the sound was swallowed quickly by the vastness of the space. As he drew closer to the machine, he noticed fine lines along its surface, delicate carvings that resembled constellations and circuits. At once, his fingers itched to touch it, but something inside him told him to wait. Then, as if sensing his presence, the machine began to wake. Lights flickered along its base, first faint, then brighter, climbing higher and higher up its body. A low, resonant tone filled the cavern, vibrating through his chest. Sundar froze. His breath caught in his throat. A panel in the machine's side slid open without a sound, revealing what looked like a control console. It rose slowly from the floor, its surface smooth and polished, with more of those glowing symbols etched along its edges. In the center was a single circle of light, pulsing gently as though it had a heartbeat. He stepped closer, unable to resist now. His hands hovered over the console. The circle of light brightened when he moved nearer, and the whispers he had heard earlier grew louder, still indistinct, but full of emotion. He reached out, and the moment his fingers touched the light, the entire cavern seemed to inhale. The machine shuddered, and the walls blazed with color, symbols racing across them in waves. The tone rose higher, becoming a melody, strange yet familiar, and the ground beneath him trembled softly. Then a voice spoke. It was not a voice he heard with his ears, but one that bloomed in his mind, clear and calm, and impossibly old. Welcome, Sundar Pichai. We have been waiting. His breath hitched. He glanced around instinctively, but there was no one there. Do not be afraid, the voice said gently. You have already proven yourself. You saw what others could not. You fixed what others would not. You carry what others have forgotten. And so, you have been chosen? Sundar swallowed hard. Chosen for what? He whispered. To wake us. To finish what was begun long before your time. To save what can still be saved? I don't understand, Sundar said softly, though his hand still rested on the circle of light. The voice seemed to smile, though there was no sound of laughter. You will. And then in the next moment, his mind was filled with images. So many and so fast, he staggered back. He saw rockets rising into the sky, breaking through clouds. He saw great cities of glass and green, full of laughter and light. He saw hands reaching across oceans, building bridges, making peace. But then came darkness, fires consuming forests, towers crumbling, oceans swallowing shorelines. He saw rockets again, but now they fell from the sky like dying stars. And finally, He saw this machine waiting silently beneath the ground well above. The world forgot it existed. Sundar fell to his knees, breathing hard. The visions faded, leaving behind only the echo of the voice. You have awakened us, but others will try to stop you. They fear what we are, what you can do. We must choose. Leave now and forget, or stay and finish what you began. He sat there in silence, the choice heavy in his chest. But before he could speak, he heard a sound that did not come from the machine. Footsteps echoing in the cavern. Behind him, sharp and fast. He spun around, his heart hammering, and saw them, the two figures from above. They stood at the far edge of the cavern now, staring at him with cold, hard eyes. Their dark suits looked out of place in this strange, glowing world. But the weapons they carried gleamed with deadly purpose. Step away from the console. One of them barked, but Sundar did not move. The closer of the two raised his weapon. Now, he said, his voice echoing against the walls. Sundar took a deep breath. Behind him, the machine hummed louder, and the circle of light pulsed under his hand like a heartbeat, growing faster. You don't know what this is, Sundar said quietly. We know enough, the man said. Step away. But something Sundar had shifted. The vision still burned in his mind. The rockets, the cities, the fire, the silence. He turned back to the console and pressed his hand flat against the light. The cavern exploded with sound and light. So bright the two. Men cried out and shielded their eyes. The ground shook violently, dust and pebbles raining down from the ceiling. The machine roared to life now, fully awake, its body glowing with colors that spilled into the air like waves. A shield of light flared between Sundar and the two intruders, and they pounded against it with fists and weapons to no effect. The voice returned in his mind. You had chosen. The machine began to rise from the floor, its massive form lifting higher and higher as more panels unfolded and lights blazed. Sundar stumbled but kept his hand on the console, feeling the strange warmth spread through him. Beneath him, the ground cracked open wider, and from deep below came the sound of rushing wind, or perhaps water, and a faint, strange song, rising in pitch. Then the voice spoke once more, calm but commanding. Hold on. It is time. Before Sundar could ask what that meant, the ground dropped away completely. The machine, and Sundar with it, surged upward, through the cavern ceiling, through the layers of rock and earth, bursting into the desert dawn in a storm of sand and light. The two men below stared up in shock as the machine broke through to the surface, its form now fully revealed, wings of light spreading wide, engines of fire awakening at its base. Sundar stood at the console, gripping it tightly as the wind roared around him. His scarf whipped wildly behind him, and his eyes glimmered with determination. And in the silence that followed the machine's deafening ascent, a single thought settled in his mind. There was no going back now, but somewhere, far beyond the horizon, something waited for him, something bigger than anything he had ever known. The flight beyond the clouds, machine climbed higher and higher, carrying Sundar with it into the morning sky. At first it moved like a rocket, fast and furious, but soon its motion became smoother, almost graceful, as though the air itself parted to let it through. The desert below shrank into a patchwork of sand and rock. The mountains flattened into soft ridges, and above him, the clouds began to glow gold and pink as the rising sun struck them from below. Sundar gripped the console, his breath foggy in the cool air that rushed past him. His scarf flapped wildly behind his neck, and his heart pounded with something between fear and awe. He had never flown before, not even in a small airplane. Yet, here he was, rising on a machine older than the desert itself, built by hands. He could not even imagine, guided by a voice that lived somewhere deep inside his mind. As they ascended, the world around him began to change. The machine's wings unfolded fully now, vast arcs of shimmering energy that stretched far beyond its metallic frame. Light rippled along them, bending the air in strange, beautiful patterns. He could see the earth curving below, the thin line of the horizon glowing against the blackness above. And then he heard the voice again. You are doing well, Sundar. Do not let go. The path is long, but you are ready. He swallowed, the thin air burning his lungs. Where are we going? He asked aloud, though he already knew the answer would come not in words, but in feelings. Sure enough, the voice returned, calm and full of quiet certainty. You are going home, he frowned, gripping the console tighter as a shiver ran through him. Home? He thought of his home, the tiny room where he had grown up, the quiet streets of his childhood, the smell of jasmine in the air after a rain. But somehow he knew that was not what the voice meant. They broke through the last of the clouds, and the full expanse of the heavens opened before him. Stars glimmered faintly even in the morning light, and the sky above turned a deeper and deeper blue until it was nearly black. Sundar gasped softly, his eyes wide. He had never seen anything so beautiful, but as he looked around, he noticed something else, faint shapes moving in the distance, just beyond the reach of his sight. They were fast, and they were getting closer. Hold steady, the voice urged. You are not alone, but you must not let them stop you. They do not understand what is at stake. Sundar glanced to the left, and there, just at the edge of his vision, was one of the shapes. Sleek, sharp, and dark, it moved like a predator through the air, its edges shimmering like heat on stone. Then another appeared to the right, and another behind him. They circled the machine, their movements deliberate and coordinated. Sundar's single quotes S-pulse quickened. The console beneath his hands began to glow brighter, and he felt a faint warmth spread through his arms. As though the machine was giving him its strength, the closest shape darted suddenly toward him, and he flinched as a sharp beam of white light shot from its nose. It struck the wing of his machine with a soundless flash, but instead of tearing it apart, the wing absorbed the blow and flared even brighter, throwing the attacker back with a burst of energy. Do not fear them, the voice said. They are only shadows of what once was. They cannot break you unless you let them. Another shadow rushed at him. And this time, Sundar leaned instinctively into the console, feeling the machine respond to his will. The great wings swept downward, and the entire craft rolled to the side. Narrowly avoiding the strike, the shadows hissed and circled closer. Faster now, weaving around him in dizzying patterns. Sundar closed his eyes for a moment, drawing a slow breath, and when he opened them again, something had shifted. He no longer felt like a passenger. He felt connected. As though the machine and he were one. He pressed both palms flat against the console and thought. Faster. The machine roared to life in response, the wings flaring brighter. The air splitting as they surged upward, leaving the shadows far below. They streaked through the last wisps of atmosphere, and suddenly the sky around him went completely black. The stars above were no longer faint, but sharp and brilliant, scattered across the darkness in endless patterns. The earth below glowed softly, its edges lined with thin blue light. Sundar stared, breathless, unable to speak. For a moment, all was quiet. Only the faint hum of the machine and the steady pulse of the console beneath his hands. Then the voice spoke again, lower now, almost reverent. You have reached the threshold. From here, the path diverges. But you must know the truth before you choose. The truth. Sundar whispered, though he wasn't sure if the voice could hear his ... before. His eyes, the blackness of space, seemed to ripple and unfold. A curtain of light split the void, and through it he saw cities, but not like any city on earth. Towering spires of glass and crystal stretched into the stars, bridges of light connecting them. Vast gardens bloomed in the air itself, and people or beings moved gracefully between the towers, their forms indistinct but full of quiet purpose. Then the vision shifted, and he saw another place, a planet scarred and broken, its surface cracked and burning. Enormous machines lay toppled and silent, and the sky above it was choked with black smoke. This is what was lost, the voice said softly. And what could yet be found? Sundar swallowed hard, his chest tight. Why me? He asked, his voice barely audible. The voice did not answer at first, but then it spoke, quietly. because you still believe it is possible. Because you have not forgotten what others chose to forget. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the words settle over him. Somewhere deep inside, something clicked into place. A memory, perhaps, or simply a feeling he had carried all his life without knowing it. But before he could speak again, the machine lurched suddenly to one side. He opened his eyes just in time to see a shadow, larger than the others, streaking toward him from the darkness, its edges blazing with light. This one was different, stronger, faster. It struck the machine hard, and Sundar was thrown to the floor. The console sparked and flickered. The wings faltered for a moment, and the craft shuddered violently, spinning through the void. The voice in his mind sounded strained now. He must not let go. Hold on, Sundar. Hold on. He crawled back to the console, his fingers scraping across its surface as the machine twisted and groaned. The shadow struck again, and the cavernous silence of space seemed to crack open with a deafening roar. One of the wings shattered into fragments of light that scattered into the stars. The machine buckled, and Sundar clung desperately to the console, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The shadow loomed before him now, its shape more defined, jagged and menacing. Its core burning with dark fire. And then, in his mind, a final command came, clear and full of quiet power. Choose, Sundar. Choose now. Finish what was begun, or turn back and let it all fade. This is your moment. He stared at the shadow ahead, his fingers trembling above the console. The earth glowed faintly below him. The stars burned silently above. And the choice burned in his chest, impossible and yet already made. He drew a deep breath, his eyes steady, and then he pressed his palm to the console one last time. The machine blazed with a sudden, blinding light, brighter than anything he had seen before. And then everything vanished. Asterisk the choice and the cost one, the light faded. Sundar found himself standing in silence, his hand still pressed to the console. But everything around him was different. Gone was the vast darkness of space. Gone was the broken wing and the circling shadows. He stood now in a strange, quiet place, a chamber that felt at once impossibly vast and yet intimate, like standing inside a cathedral carved from starlight. The floor beneath his feet glowed faintly, soft as moonlight, and stretched outward into the distance where it melted into nothingness. Above him there was no ceiling, only a sky of swirling colors and faint constellations that moved as though alive. The air itself seemed heavy with meaning, every breath carrying the weight of something ancient and watchful. Asterisk. Ahead of him stood a figure, not quite human, not quite anything else. It was tall and slender, wrapped in robes of faint light, its face hidden behind a shifting veil of stars. It radiated a quiet authority, yet there was no malice in it. Only a kind of solemn patience. Sundar straightened, though his legs felt weak, his chest still tight from the climb and the fight. His voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. Where am I? The figure's voice came not as sound, but as presence, soft yet filling every corner of the chamber. You are at the threshold. Few reach it, even fewer understand it. But all who arrive must choose? Choose? Sundar asked, though some part of him already understood. The figure raised a long, delicate hand and pointed. Suddenly the floor split into two glowing paths. One to his left and one to his right, each fading into the strange horizon. On the left, the path shimmered with hues of gold and green, full of quiet promise. On the right, the path glimmered silver and blue, sharp and cold, but alive with energy. One path leads back. The figure said, back to the world you knew. Your name will fade, your days will be quiet. The earth will continue as it has, and you will be free from this burden. Sundar followed the left path with his eyes. He thought of home again, the smell of morning tea, the dusty streets, the quiet corners where he used to dream. The other path, the figure continued, gesturing to the right, leads forward. It is full of storms and sacrifice, but through it lies the chance to wake the world, to finish what was left undone. If you take it, you will not return the same. You may not return at all. But the light you carry will reach far beyond you. Sundar stood there, silent, his breath quickening. The words echoed inside him, storms and sacrifice. Or quiet and freedom. The figure waited, motionless, as though it could wait forever, his fingers clenched at his sides. He thought of the rocket he had fixed, the way it came alive under his hands. He thought of the engineer who had laughed at him. He thought of the two men who had followed him into the desert. And he thought of the broken cities he had seen in. The vision, the blackened skies, the people who had forgotten how to hope. His voice shook when he asked, "Why me?" For the first time, the figure moved closer, and though its face was hidden, Sundar felt its gaze on him, heavy yet gentle. Because when all others turned away, you stepped forward. When they saw only failure, you saw possibility. Because the smallest hands can carry the greatest light. The words struck him deeper than he expected. And for a long moment he stood still, staring at the two paths glowing before him. He took a slow breath. Then another. And then, finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll go forward." As soon as the words left his mouth, the chamber trembled faintly, and the figure inclined its head in a gesture that might have been approval. "Then the cost is yours," it said. "And the way begins now." The right-hand path flared brightly, and the light beneath his feet surged upward, wrapping around him like a storm. The air grew hot, almost painful, and he gasped as his body lifted off the ground. Visions flashed through him again, cities reborn, towers of green and glass, bridges of light, but also fire and ash, shadow and silence. His chest felt like it might crack open under the weight of it all. And then everything went white when the light faded. He was standing again, but not in the chamber. He stood on a narrow balcony, high above a city he did not recognize. The air was thick and hot, the sky heavy with smoke and faint lightning. Below him, the streets twisted in impossible ways, alive with strange machines and creatures that moved with eerie precision. Great towers rose and fell in slow waves, as though the city itself breathed. He stumbled to the edge of the balcony and gripped the railing, staring down the chaos below. The city was alive, but broken, restless. Waiting behind him, a low voice spoke. Not the same voice as before. This one was deeper, darker, and very close. "You should have chosen the other path." He spun around, his pulse racing. Standing at the doorway to the balcony was another figure, taller than the first, cloaked in something darker than shadow, its eyes faint embers in the gloom. It radiated a heavy, suffocating presence that pressed against Sundar's chest. "Who are you?" Sundar managed to ask, though his throat was dry. The figure stepped closer, its movements smooth and quiet. "I am the keeper of what you abandoned. I am the weight you thought you could bear. And now," it said, tilting its head faintly, "I am your shadow." The ground beneath Sundar's feet cracked suddenly, and the balcony shuddered. Below, the city groaned and shifted, its towers leaning as if to listen. "You think you can fix this," the shadow said, its voice low and full of contempt. "You think you can carry it, but you will break before you even begin." Sundar clenched his hands into fists, forcing himself to stand straight, even as the air grew heavier. "Then I'll break," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "But I won't turn back." For the first time, the shadow smiled, though it was not a kind smile. "Then come," it said. "Let me show you what you've chosen." The shadow raised a hand, and the balcony gave way beneath Sundar's feet. He fell, the city rising to meet him, its streets opening like jaws, its towers bending inward, the faint cries of unseen voices echoing around him. And as he fell, he felt the faintest trace of the first voice, the gentle one, whisper in his mind, "Hold on. Even now, hold on." Then the world below swallowed him whole. Asterisk, the last light Sundar fell through darkness. That was not really darkness. It was alive with flickers of strange lights, each one carrying a memory, a whisper, a face he could almost remember but not quite name. The city's towers rose around him as he descended, their jagged shapes bending and curling, reaching for him as though the city itself wanted to claim him. He twisted midair, his arms outstretched, his scarf trailing above him like a fragile ribbon. The weight of everything he had seen, the broken rocket, the glowing hatch, the underground machine, the visions of cities reborn and ruined, pressed down on his chest until he could hardly breathe. Yet somewhere deep inside him, a quiet voice remained, hold on. Even now. Hold on, then the fall stopped. He landed hard on a surface that felt neither solid nor soft. A strange, shimmering floor that rippled like water but held his weight. He staggered to his knees, gasping, and looked up. The shadow stood before him again. Taller now, darker than before, its ember-like eyes blazing brighter. Behind it rose the city, vast and endless, its towers cracking and groaning, its streets lined with impossible machines and faint figures watching silently from the edges. You cannot fix this, the shadow said, its voice now deep enough to make the air tremble. This world is broken beyond repair. It was broken long before you ever came here. You think your hand can mend what countless others destroyed? Sundar stood slowly, his knees shaking, but his gaze steady. Someone has to try, he said. His voice hoarse but clear. The shadow laughed, a sound that echoed through the streets like thunder. And you think that someone is you? It sneered. Yes, Sundar whispered. The shadow's smile faded. Its form grew sharper, more defined, like a blade being drawn. It raised a long, dark arm, and the air around them began to split, revealing flashes of the broken city Sundar had seen earlier, the fires, the smoke, the ocean swallowing the shores. Look, the shadow said coldly. Look at what awaits you if you choose to stand. Look at the cost. Everything you love will burn. Everyone who follows you will fall. And you will stand alone in the ashes? Sundar stared at the images, and he did see the fire, the ruin, the silence. But beyond them, he also saw something else, faint but unmistakable. A spark, a hand, reaching, a tower rebuilt. A child laughing. He drew a long, slow breath. Then let it burn, he said softly. If that's what it takes to find the light again, let it burn. And I'll still stand. The shadow hissed, its form writhing in fury. Then you have chosen your end. But Sundar shook his head. No, he said. I've chosen my beginning. At that, the ground beneath his feet flared with light, not the fragile gold of the visions, but something purer, stronger, so bright it hurt to look at. The rippling floor surged upward into pillars of radiant energy, shattering the darkness, cutting through the heavy air like lightning. The shadow staggered backward, its form unraveling in the brightness. You cannot, it began, but Sundar stepped forward, raising his hands, feeling the warmth course through him, filling him to his fingertips. I can, he said simply. And with a final burst of light, the shadow exploded into 1,000 sparks that scattered and vanished into the depths of the city. The silence that followed was deep and profound, as though even the city itself was holding its breath. The towers straightened, their cracked edges mending. The strange machines paused, then began to hum faintly, alive again. Faint laughter, real, human laughter, rose from the edges, and the streets glowed softly underfoot. Sundar stood in the center of it all, his scarf still fluttering, his chest rising and falling as the warmth of the light slowly settled into him. And then, from behind him, he felt that first voice again, the gentle one, full of quiet pride. You have done well, Sundar Pichai. You have reminded them what it means to hope, what it means to stand. You will not walk alone from here. He closed his eyes and let the words sink into him. When he opened them again, the city was no longer alien. It was alive. It was